Once again, welcome back and hello everyone. Let's get started. Thank you all for taking time out to be here. Welcome to the third webinar in our series of webinars focusing on RPA. So now let me introduce Shell Chiara, who will bring up valuable insights as I speak on the ROI factors on RPA. Shell has extensive experience on RPA, working with all three major RPA platforms, namely Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism, and UiPath at executive roles in the past. So welcome, Shell. Are you there?
Niladri, thank you for having me here, and thank you V2 Solutions. It's very nice to be here.
Right. In brief about me, I'm Niladri, and I head the RPA and Digital Transformation Group at V2 Solutions. I work on sustainable automation strategy for large-scale enterprises. My group provides automation consulting and execution with focused outcomes for customers across the globe. All right. So a little bit of housekeeping. Quick notes before we start with the session. We shall have 5 to 7 minutes of question and answer sessions at the end of this presentation. So feel free to type your questions using the Q&A section in your screen. We'll try to respond to as many questions as possible. If your question is not answered during this webinar, we'll definitely do so over the email. So the agenda. I'm sure most of you are aware of RPA as a technology, so I won't be talking around introducing the technology. We'll be quickly looking at the agenda through the what, how, and why. So what you can expect today, so you can expect to understand the actual ROI of RPA in practical situations, understand the levers that control the ROI, and how do we accomplish it. We'll demonstrate actual cost involved against each of the component of a popular RPA platform, and then work out the maths behind ROI. Why we're doing this webinar? So you can take informed decisions and avoid unrealistic projections. So a quick glimpse of what we have achieved through RPA for our clients at V2 Solutions. The pictorial depiction states it all. We are specialized in SAP and website of RPA, and implementation partners for top-tier RPA platforms with large pool of certified developers. We monitor and support more than 40 robots 24/7. So far, we have had successfully deployed 240 plus processes in production. That has resulted in saving for more than 25,000 plus man hours, and our robots have so far completed 160,000 plus successful transactions. Now, starting with the resource cost worldwide. All right. Just allow me a second. Just allow me a second. All right, there's some problem with my PPT for which the colors are not showing up over here. But the slide actually was for a world map broadly depicting certain dollar values against specific regions. So the dollar value is a rough estimate of the hourly wage of clerical workers for that region. And now the interesting part, how does this relate to the topic? So in actuality, there are values being presented against each of these sections in the mail. So the question is that how does this relate to this topic? It actually does, and it does relate directly, because a high percentage of the payout can be saved by deploying robots. RPA has tremendous ability to save money, specifically for those regions having high hourly cost. And as per our experience, anything above $15 an hour is a suitable region for adoption of RPA. So the map would have actually shown it if there were colors surrounded on it. Because of some problem, the colors are not showing up. So evidently, there are regions around US, some parts of Europe, Japan look to be the right regions for adoption, whereas Asian regions may not find RPA great from saving perspective. Though RPA is not a tool only to save human effort. However, we shall be talking specifically the numbers around savings and the levers that make it possible. All right, so the levers. The levers are the controllers that decides the pace of your ROI or return on investment, to be precise. So here we have listed out some key parameters of ROI, and let's understand their role. So at the top sits the hourly cost. And we did look through the factors in previous slide around regions that justify adoption of RPA. In short, higher this parameter is, the faster you get to the ROI. So the next being the hours saved from each process. That's the human effort in hours saved by letting the robots do that specific job. For optimum output, those processes saving at least 20 hours or more should be considered for RPA. When I say 20 hours, it can be cumulative hours saved by doing the job 4 times a month even, because that's what the clerical person was exactly doing. No brainer, but the higher number of hours saved from each process, the faster the ROI. Now comes the number of processes. So more the number you automate, obviously you save more. The fourth point being the cost of development and maintenance. That is an average amount that you spend in developing and maintaining a bot for a process. While the cost of development is one-time cost, the maintenance of a bot is always a recurring cost. The maintenance or support is very important, as your bots need to be optimized based on your changing ecosystems, right? So it is common for some bots to fail at initial stages of deployment because of many reasons, at times beyond control. And support teams ensure that the bots are up and running in the shortest notice. In the next slide, you will see us putting a value against each of these levers. So based on our experience, we have considered nearly 25% of the cost towards the yearly maintenance and the rest towards the one-time automation against the process. And the fifth one over here is the cost of license. That's typically an annual subscription price that you pay to the RPA platforms, and we will assume certain cost based on the selling price for one of the leading RPA platforms. This cost might vary to large extent based on the reputation of the chosen platform, right? So Shell, I would like to bring you in over here. So what you have to say on the assumptions of these levers, how practical these are?
See, I think these levers make sense when it comes to identifying the ROI of a bot implementation. But I feel that these are not the only levers. So to give you an example, software cost is only a part of the total cost of ownership in an RPA program. There have been studies done on this by HFS Group, Horses for Sources, that say that RPA licensing costs are just about 25 to 30% of the total cost for implementing RPA. So I think what you're showing here are good levers for implementing RPA. But in reality, the bot is not a standard unit of measure because most RPA products are priced as a function of number of bots. However, as a bot as a unit of measure is a little bit hard to understand. It does not equate to common units of input pricing like FTE or other associated costs, or it does not associate with output pricing measures, which is like a number of volumes processed. So the meaning of bot across the RPA products is not standard. A UiPath bot is not the same as a Blue Prism bot, which is different from an Automation Anywhere bot. So in terms of pure implementation levers, these are the right ones. But as we go further, I think we should also talk about, and we will, about what are some of the other intangibles that are in place.
That's great. Great. All right. Thanks, Shel, for that insight. What we will do next is that now that we are aware of these levers from the previous slides, let's put some value against each of these as if it's an enterprise trying to do the real maths around the savings. So the first assumption is the region's hourly cost. We put that as $20 an hour, a reasonable value which is not too high, not too low. Now the enterprise sets a target to automate processes that can save at least 20 hours, 25 hours, 25 hours a month. A reasonable value which is not too high, not too low. No. Now the enterprise, next is a number of processes that's put at 8. That means in totality, the org is targeting nearly 50 man hours of effort to save 50 hours man hours of effort. The cost of development comes from our experience as a leading implementation partner for multiple leading platforms. And we can safely assume it to be around $4,000 against each process. That's including the cost of support for the process for a year, which is considered at 25% of the total development cost. Mm-hmm. The cost of license, we have assumed that at $36,000 per annum, that eventually translates to $1,500 per process. And that's how it is derived. So we recommend a setup 2 studios, 2 robots, and a remote platform for starting enterprises, at least for the first year. So the studio, the 2 studios, because at least 2 development team or 2 developers can work simultaneously in parallel, sorry. There has to be 2 robots for deployment, out of which probably 1 or 50% of 1 robot would be used for the testing purposes, and 1.5 is left for production deployment. An orchestrator or a remote console is an environment which controls your remotes, and there is a separate license in most of the providers, and that's what we would need one. There are other infrastructure and orchestrator dependencies like software license to run the orchestrator, third-party licenses and stuff like that. That we have taken around $5,000. That makes it a total of $36,000 a year, which is nearly $3,000 a month. And if I am targeting 2 processes, that makes it to be around $1,500 per process. This is the cost of license. $4,000 for the cost of development. That makes it around $5,500 process per process cost till it is deployed. Take a note that the implementation cost is against each process is developed, whereas the licensing cost is always an annual cost. Though in this case, we have averaged it out against each of the process. Okay, so now as a next thing, we will go ahead and do a plotting. So let's plot our assumptions in a graph to understand how soon the savings can exceed the actual revenue outflow. So the x-axis presents the dollar value, whereas the y-axis in the timeline is in months. So the gray and green lines present the monthly outgoing and savings respectively. As you can see, the monthly outgoing in terms of dollar is a straight line or a constant at nearly $11,000 for 12 months. The $11,000 figure is arrived by adding up the development plus maintenance and the license cost for those 2 processes that we mentioned as levers. In other words, each process is costing about $5,500. The green line, which is saving, is plotted based on the human hours saved multiplied by the region's cost of resource. You can see the table to the right. Now understand the fact that the saving has a cumulative effect because every run of the process, in this case assumed to be at least once a month, adds up multiple times. So the green line shows the savings actually starts from the 2nd month onwards at $1,000, mere $1,000, but it gradually picks up with addition of 2 new processes each month, plus the power of compounding from the previous processes automated. And we see it intersects with the gray line at 12 months. So in all possibility, the savings would start surpassing the monthly outgoing beyond the 12th month, right? So now let's move on to the next one. With that in mind, let's jump to plot the same graph again with another set of levers. That's presented through the orange line. If you look at the table to the right, you will see we tweak the levers for two set of new values. First, instead of $25 as an hourly cost, we made it $30, targeting to save around 30 hours, 30 hours a month, and we are now looking at saving around 30 hours per month per process. Interestingly, the monthly outgoing remains the same because of two things over here. Firstly, the cost of license is not changing. And secondly, based on our experience, the cost of development plus support almost remains same at $4,000 per process. It's not going to change much. However, as you can see, the orange line intersects by 8th month, which is 4 months earlier than the previous case. So the conclusion here is a little bit of changes to the levers make a huge difference in saving. In this case, it was just a difference of $5 and 5 hours, but it made significant difference from the faster ROI perspective. So now think of how would things be if you plan to save more hours by targeting those extremely inefficient processes, or you have processes that can run more frequently, thereby saving more and more of human efforts. All right, so let me put this to Shail. So Shail, are you in agreement with what I just projected, or you have seen this in reality with many of the customers? Would you like to share your ideas?
I think I think from a purely sort of formulaic and mathematical perspective, this makes sense. There are additional costs that are associated, as you pointed out, Niladri, in terms of the support that is needed inside the organization, the infrastructure that is needed inside the organization. However, the savings model here, and in most instances, is based on the number of hours saved. And essentially, the challenge that most CFOs have in an organization is to really recognize this as a tangible saving to the business. So when we say, as an example, we automated this process and it delivered 25,000 hours saved back to the business, and we calculate a saving based on that, which is how this model is based on. The 25,000 was an arbitrary number I raised. That does make sense from a business unit ROI perspective to communicate the value of RPA to the executive teams. However, when it comes to the actual savings for the business itself, it's very difficult for CFOs to translate this saving into tangible savings for the business. So when we say that we automated, let's say, 30% of a person's time as we did task automation, it's very difficult to for the CFO to reconcile how does that 30% actually translate into whether it's FTE savings, whether it's lesser number of hires that we need to do because we have saved X thousand hours a year. Those metrics are not clearly defined in an organization. So there's a thing called derivative metrics. RPA started, at least in 2018, the whole conversation around RPA was FTE savings. More recently, the conversations have shifted to a number of hours returned back to the business, customer satisfaction increased in the business, and these are what I call derivative metrics, meaning that they don't have a direct correlation with automation. For example, often companies will say, my customer satisfaction went up by 3 points because my customer success teams had more empathy on the call. And that's because they had more time, and that's because something was automated. And hence the increase in customer satisfaction should be tied to automation. So it's a very loose derivative metric. Coming back to what you're showing here, I think, again, from a formulaic and mathematical perspective, yes, this absolutely makes sense. But there are other intangibles to keep in mind when you get beyond your business unit presentation of these savings to the CFO level of, okay, how does this really translate into savings for my business?
You are absolutely correct, Shale. In fact, this is one side of the coin, which is probably the very, very happy scenarios. We'll be talking in next few slides what are actually the real saving factors are, what actually shows up in practicality. Great. Okay, so moving on to the next one, where we are talking up something which is not only about cost saving. So let's talk some of the facts. So cost saving is not the only objective in RPA. In other words, enterprises do deploy RPA in many other regions for many other reasons, which are also critical while you look into the ROI. So all these criteria that you see over here are compared against the human's ability to perform a specific operation. For an example, a robot has unmatched speed, especially if you compare it with the operations performed by human. So just from a comparison standpoint, a robot can read 300 plus rows in an Excel in less than a second and eventually perform different operations in the data set that it just read through. Similarly, it can extract details of at least 5 mails in the similar time. It can match more than 60 images to their actual source and create a report in a minute. The technique used by many of these online retailers to ensure their thousands of product images are exactly what it was intended. They do not take a sick leave or a vacation, ensuring our operations continuity for 24/7. Even though the robots run 24/7, the quality of the output is assured because these are machines after all. The robot ensures a deep audit trail. In other words, you have signature of every minute operations detailed and documented, thus ensuring accountability and responsibility of all transactions. So that's one side of it. Now coming to the real part of it. So are these savings that we projected are savings in real sense? So we talked a lot of savings through reasonable projection, based on the monthly outgoing, and everything looked like great use case. But do the savings really show up in real sense? It's you to decide as we bring in some facts from the other side of the coin. So the savings projected can be referred as notional savings. Typically, robots does ease out work of specific roles by certain percentage, let's say by 20 to 30%. So it frees up specific resources by that percent. But enterprises still pay 100% for the resource. Now, if that is the case, then enterprises are riding on the concept of notional saving. However, if enterprises have the right alignment plan for those freed up resources for more productive work up the value chain, then the projection is of saving would still make sense. Now coming to the next point, the cost of process optimization. And automation would not bring in reasonable value unless existing process is made optimal for its adoption. In other words, enterprises must analyze, enhance, or fix many of their existing processes, which might result into spending time for training, tweaking infrastructure, and that comes with a cost. So that cost doesn't show up upfront. And then there is a cost of engagement. Your resources, namely, subject matter experts, business owners, application owners need to dedicate reasonable amount of time for their respective process to take shape. One thing is very important in RPA implementation, that's the extensive communication that happens among stakeholders. We have seen failures resulting out of communication barriers among stakeholders. Now, this too comes with a cost of your resources. Lastly, a very debatable factor in the cost, that's cost to redo. Do understand the fact that robots are not intelligent enough to adapt to interface or functional changes in your ecosystem. That may include process or even interface of the applications. Thus, every time there are changes, you need to reprogram the robot to adapt to those changes. And changes in many cases are something unavoidable. So you must be prepared to redo your existing automation in face of changes within your ecosystem. And that comes with a cost too. So Shell, with this kind of hidden cost, which is not at times visible upfront, has it been a shock factor in any of the engagement that you have witnessed in the past?
It often comes as a surprise to many organizations. I think just the first part of what you discussed in the earlier slides, that needing to have a operation and maintenance team in place infrastructure costs in place. Just that step alone often comes as a surprise. But I think there are other aspects to this, as you have pointed out. You talked about intelligent bots. Turning bots into intelligent digital workers is a challenge. The sort of assumed easy fix of engaging an ecosystem, like, for example, process mining or AI capabilities or other parts of the broader ecosystem that you may want to engage in for bolt-ons or plugins for future use cases, you know, ushers in a whole new wave of costs, right? These other technologies also need their own infrastructure components, their reference architectures.
Mm-hmm.
There's, support terms, commercial agreements with other vendors. But although some of these reference architectures actually exist, these deployments do not just happen at a push of a button, right? So if you are trying to deploy an RPA plus a process mining capability, plus possibly an analytics capability, if it's not necessarily coming from a vendor, or even in some instances, if it's coming from the same vendor, it carries with itself separate costs as well. Experienced consultants are required to ensure that there's a suitable configuration that meets your business needs. In the rush to move from proof of concept to production, often this can be overlooked and leaves the companies exposed to significant risk. So as I've said before, I think and there are studies on this, that software cost of RPA are only a minor portion of the total cost of ownership. When I think of automation product, I think of the whole product, which is software plus services plus support. And software just represents about 25 to 30% of the expenditure. So often organizations, if they are only looking at, I'm going to deploy the bots and I need this level of infrastructure and I need a few people to manage the bots, then they're underestimating the hidden costs of deployments, which is something that you've shown here.
Yeah, but at the same time, Shell, do you think ever the organization can only depend on the RPA? Do you see cases? Because I don't realize that. Like, I haven't seen that happening. Like, they have to have RPA with third-party components, RPA with OCR components, RPA with ML components. On that gets the holistic automation altogether, right?
Yes, if you are trying to do task automation, if you are trying to automate a certain portion of the process, and if that portion of the process is completely structured in nature, RPA does a good job at that. It gives you the arms and the legs. But if you're trying to do end-to-end automation, if you're trying to do true digital transformation, if you're trying to identify predictive capabilities from your data, that's where you need AI, ML components in place, possibly chatbots, depending on the type of your business. And yes, that ecosystem is not well integrated today. I would throw process mining in that mix as well, and requires for a customer and their associated services partner to be able to stand up those capabilities inside an organization. So it definitely becomes an RPA plus, in my opinion, but the expectation setting has to be clear with RPA in terms of the ROI that it can generate.
Great. Yeah, that was it. That was a great insight, Shell. Thank you so much. All right. With this, we come to the quick takeaways from this webinar. The cost of license that we look at around 36K, the cost of development support at 4,000. Saving is not the only criteria for RPA adoption. And obviously, we talked about the notional saving and how it has a factor on realignment of the resources. That we discussed of the right process can have compounding effect on the overall savings. Optimizing processes before automation really helps in achieving a faster ROI. So now with this, we come to the last part of the webinar and the Q&A session. As we continue with the Q&A, you should be seeing a quick poll on your screen. Your feedback would help us improve the overall experience. for our upcoming webinars. Okay, I see a list of questions already coming up. Okay. Let me pick up a few of those. All right. How there's a question that's coming from Rochelle. Okay, how does the cost of license vary with increasing number of processes? Okay, so Rochelle, just to answer your answer your question. Okay, so there is no straight formula to get that similar calculation, but I can give you a relative reference. Let's say you plan to automate more than 4 processes, each saving 30 hours a month. That means you need more developers to work in parallel, and each developer requires a studio. So you might have to invest in additional studios or development licenses. Similarly, when you have more and more processes going live, you need more robots to execute those processes. Let's say you have 30 plus processes, each running every day for a certain amount of time, and your robot is nearly 90 to 95% utilized. So you need to get more robots for the new processes to execute. So it all depends on what you would like to achieve within what time. But as we mentioned, 2 studios or development environment, 2 robots, and a remote orchestration platform is a good starting point for an enterprise. Okay, picking up the next question. Are there cheaper alternatives to that kind of license cost? From Smith. Okay. Thanks for the question, Smith. Yes, there are. The prox cost that we discuss is typically offered by some of the top tier RPA platforms. However, there are smaller players offering similar platforms at much cheaper cost, at times 1/3 of the price, and the feature lists are growing at a fast pace. But the concern with the smaller player is you do not probably get a lot of market validation with these new platforms. Having said that, I believe RPA license model and cost will undergo a lot of changes in very near future due to the pressure from the smaller players who might build great cases for themselves in very soon. In fact, there are open source RPA platforms, 2 which are yet to mature for the mainstream adoption. Once they do, their price, they would put another set of price pressure on the existing players. All right. The next question how much time is generally spent on maintenance of robots? Okay, so let us see what all is involved in maintenance of robots. Thanks, Mitch, for the question. One of the major activities is handling changes to the systems involved in the process. Another is changes to the business rule, which immediately impacts the outcome of the process. And such things need to be handled with topmost priority. And from our experience, we see this happening a lot. Then there are bot failures happening due to reasons out of anyone's control, like application become unresponsive at times, right? You open up the browser, it is not responding. So the bot is just dead at that point of time, not able to proceed further. Unstable internet connectivity, etc., which can be handled only with continuous monitoring and taking immediate steps to resolve such issues. And overall, we have seen around 25% of the total effort being spent on such activities once the process is automated. So I hope that answers your question. All right. Great. So looks like that's all the time we have. We will respond back to all of the questions that we have received in a separate mail personally. Once again, a big thank you and thanks to Shale for your thoughtful insights. Feel free, everyone, to write to us at rpa.info@v2solutions.com. We love to hear your ideas on RPA and maybe your suggestion for the next webinar topic. We look forward to seeing you soon and the next topic. Till then, goodbye and have a great day ahead.
Thank you, Devadri.
Thanks, Shale. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.